How we doing out there, A.B.A.T.E of Illinois? This is your state legislative coordinator again, Josh Witkowski. I am live in Waco, Texas this fine Saturday early afternoon. Just got done eating lunch at the building behind me, which is now a Louisiana Crab Shack, but in 2015 it was a Twin Peaks restaurant. And for those of you that follow what I've talked about with profiling issues and that, this is the restaurant where, unfortunately, in 2015, an altercation occurred, and it resulted in shootings that resulted in the deaths of several bikers. What's curious about the incident and what we learn from it, what originally was happening behind me in 2015 was a Region 1 COCI meeting. One of the reasons why they were meeting is they wanted to discuss why the state of Texas was stealing money from the Motorcycle Safety Fund. Sounds familiar to anybody who's watching this from Illinois. We faced similar problems before. And to my knowledge, they still face that problem down here in Texas. It's one of the things that we're going to be discussing later today with them. But that was the purpose of the meeting. An altercation occurred, violence did break out, there was some shootings. What was really curious about it is that there were also a large number of police present who then saw fit to open fire on the assembled bikers. They said that they were shooting only at people that they thought were a threat. 9 people were killed, 5 of which were killed by weapons that matched police officers. I believe that was the final number on that. So that was interesting. Then what was even worse is 177 people were arrested on identical warrants and charges. They were all held on, I think it was nearly $1 million bond, and it didn't matter who you were. If it was a Christian club, veterans club, didn't matter what vest you wore, didn't matter who you were with, you were all arrested. Many of these people couldn't make that bond. Every warrant said the exact same thing on it, even though most people were here peacefully. They were all thrown into jail identically, which caused this. It caused a lot of people to lose their jobs, caused them to lose families, children were lost, income was lost, houses lost, lives just destroyed because a very lazy state's attorney by the name of A.B.A.T.E decided everybody needed to be brought in on the exact same charges. Worse than that, for the next 3 days, the Waco Police Department put out stories about how this was a supposed biker gang meeting and all sorts of terrible stories ripped straight from the headlines or Sons of Malarkey, take your pick. And that story went unchallenged in the media. And that's part of the problem with profiling, is that when you allow people to stereotype everybody together, media gets to choose their story. The agencies involved got to put out this horrible story, and it wasn't until several months later that the real story started coming out through investigations and everything. Eventually, a majority of the charges end up dropped. One trial ends up being held. The trial ends up a mistrial, hung jury. After the hung jury occurs, nobody else goes to trial. As we sit right now, 5 years later, all charges in this incident were dropped. The state's attorney, who was lazy and decided to arrest people en masse by just profiling them all together, ended up getting defeated in a election. It was like 18 months, maybe 2 years after the incident, he was defeated in an election, and this weighed heavily on it. Meanwhile, the city and the county and the police departments involved all faced federal civil rights lawsuits because of this incident. Now, as of last known, back in April of last year, those civil rights lawsuits were tossed by a judge. They're being appealed, last I saw. But the reason why they were tossed is because the judge ended up saying it was qualified immunity. Basically, you've heard qualified immunity. We've heard it talked about before with other issues surrounding police recently. Well, because of qualified immunity, the police were not liable for people who may have been shot that were not combatants or part of the original skirmish. The state's attorney was not liable for the damage that he inflicted on the lives of people who lost their jobs, lost their houses, lost their families, because he chose to do a fill-in-the-blank warrant. This is the dangers of profiling. When you allow everybody to be grouped together and judged like that, government can do what they want to you. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And this is why this incident matters. This is why we work against issues of profiling, because it will come back and get you. I mean, it does hurt the motorcycle community when this stuff happens. So when you hear us talk about it, I mean, the loss to the people was bad, but the loss to the community is even worse, because they're still looking at potentially being on the hook for these federal civil rights violations if an appellate court decides so, unless he decides to let it go. But I figured I'd just give you kind of a heads up on it, kind of talk about it a little bit, let you understand why we look at it and what it means to the motorcycle community. And it is something that, you know, we need to keep an eye out on for the future. We need to watch when government groups say, you know what, you can't have groups together. You know, we've seen that in Illinois. We've had the gaming board go after veterans of foreign wars because they've got too many bikers hanging out and they happen to have video gaming terminals. It's an issue of profiling right there happening in Illinois. You know, these are things that we have to stick together about. So instead of choosing and picking one another, you know, and saying, oh, we're not like those bikers over there, maybe if we all just acted like bikers together and hung together, we might be able to fight things like this and keep something like this from happening in the future. Until then, we'll be back later tonight when we meet up with the people back in Austin. But this is signing off for the day. Have a good one.